River. They're at the Pabst Theater tonight. We're at the Pabst Pub. Wyoke is opening up the show this evening. Doors at 7, shows at 8. New disc is called I Am Very Far. And there's been a really fun thing that's happened around the station. Maybe you won't think it's all that fun, but several of our jocks, every time they refer to it, they go, I am very fair. No, wait, it's I am very far. So I love the new CD. It's one of those kind of start to finish listen records where you don't immediately say, oh well, what track do you think is the best? You have to put it on and kind of find out for yourself. And one of the things I realized about it was that you produced this yourself this time.
Yeah, I just had a kind of a, for years and years and years I've been working with a kind of a co-producer. And over time, when we first started out, I didn't really know anything about what I was doing. And he started guiding us a lot. But then, over time, it became more and more clear to me what I wanted, and I just kind of hit a point where I really clearly saw what I wanted out of the record, and I saw sort of how to do it, and it was not so much of just this, big decision. It was almost like, oh, we don't really need somebody, other than just somebody to help shove it along. It's like, we don't really need an overarching vision guy, because I had this really clear vision about what I wanted.
Well, now, because you produced the record you did with Roky Erickson too. Mm-hmm. I guess that was sort of a good practice for doing your own record.
Yeah, I'd kind of done some production before. I did this Bird of Youth record, I did this Roky Erickson record, and I'd kind of done a lot of stuff on my own, just little songs here and there. So the Roky Erickson thing was a real trial by fire, though. I got asked to do that, and I had to really think hard about whether or not I thought I could do it. Mm-hmm. They sent me the songs, and I just completely fell in love with the songs, and I felt this fierce sense that I could, that I wanted to bring across the way I saw the songs. So that was when I kind of became a producer, just because I was like, I see what I want, I'm going to make it happen,
Well, I was going to save all the Roky Erickson questions for the end, and mm-hmm. There weren't that many of them. Mostly it has to do with, I couldn't have you standing in front of me and not say something about what a killer record that turned out to be.
Oh, thank you, man.
And also,
I'm really proud of it. I appreciate that.
So sort of seeing your reaction to it, I guess in a sense, you probably had the same reaction that most people would have is, do you want to produce a Roky Erickson record? And probably the first thing is, are you kidding? Really?
Well, it comes with a lot of baggage because, you're thinking about not screwing it up. That was the most important thing. And yeah, it's like, that would be my main hesitation, would be like, well, I don't want to be the guy who messed up Rocky's record. But at the same time, if you go into something like that, where it's a legend, I think that there's a danger that comes from taking it too seriously and too reverently, because then you can kind of end up with a black tie affair. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Oh, yeah. Which is not what you want. Rocky's an unruly, chaotic kind of artist, and you want some unruly chaos in there, you know what I mean? So it was a kind of a funny thing. I had to force myself to not be too reverent about it a lot of the time.
Did you have to force yourself to not make it an Okkervil River record at times? Because you had the whole band backing him up.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't really, to me, Okkervil River has so much to do with the way that the songs work and my, style of writing, which is very, very different from Rocky's. Although after working with Roky, I started to majorly respect his style of songwriting. I think a lot of that influence crept into the next record. But Roky has a sort of a side to him that a lot of people who are familiar with the loud, scrunky horror rock might not know, which is this sort of yearning, sort of mystical acoustic ballad side to him. And I think some people maybe were a little displeased with the finished product because it didn't represent as much of this sort of angry, scary horror rock. But my feeling was that stuff is fantastic. The Evil One is, probably his best sort of solo record. So I felt like that was well represented. And for me, it was a matter of trying to represent some other side of him.
Well, there's the other part about that too, and then I'll move on to this record, which is fantastic. But there are far too many expectations, and it's almost too unfair for you decided to take the project on. You did a fantastic job, but you can't really account for people who have the lore of 40 years of Roky Erickson.
Well, a legend like Roky, there's people who feel very proprietary about that. And people, I think, more than most artists feel very invested in Roky, and a lot of them have a well-meaning but kind of stifling attitude of thinking that they know what's best for him or something like that, which I find kind of condescending, and I know that he does too. And so there was a lot of like that I had to contend with, but that was another thing I had to tune out. Just like how there were these sort of Austin people who were trying to take control of the project at all times.
Sure.
There was a lot of that, and I just had to be like, no, I'm sorry, you know, I have to be the head of the thing, you know. And Roky was very trusting that way. It was really wonderful, you know, once we got going. And he kind of, at first he was like, he asked us, he told us that he didn't want it to be like the movie Roadhouse. Which I think is like, he didn't want us to be like throwing each other over pool tables and stabbing each other with like broken bottles, you know. He was worried it was going to be some kind of macho showdown. And when he found out it wasn't going to be like Roadhouse, he felt a lot better.
and like I said, it turned out splendidly. If you've not heard that record or you don't own that record, that's definitely one to put on, because it's another one of those, it's not a first listen record, you know. It's not
one of those records. When I finished it, I was so proud of it that I thought, God, I guess like I don't really care about doing anything else after this.
Well, I'm glad that didn't stick, because then you came out with this. I Very Far, like I said, is one of those records that, you know, it's sort of like choose your own, like find, you know, your own way through it, figure out what you like about it, because there's plenty for somebody to like. If you don't like one thing, you know, it seems to me like in your head you kind of moved on a lot. And then the other thing I noticed was you also recorded a lot of different places, so I imagine that had a little something to do with it.
Well, I think working with Roky was liberating, because I felt, I don't know, it kind of broke a lot of prejudices I had in my brain about ways to approach a song and about trying to desperately appeal to an audience in some certain way. And I just kind of felt like I wanted to delve into kind of an inner world in that way that a lot of those Roky songs do. And so I just kind of chased after that. You know, the stage names and stand-ins, our previous records had been these kind of, had something to do with pop music. And I kind of wanted to step away from that for a record and kind of get into something that was a little bit more not as inviting, the kind of thing that you had to sort of claw your way into a little bit, because I really love a record like that, like Tilt by Scott Walker or something like that, where you listen to it first and you're like, whoa, I don't know if I can, you know, I don't know how far I can get into this, and then you start listening to it more and more, and you're like, oh, it's a whole world, it's a whole alien world that I can set up a camp in, you know.
So I also did that experience of like pulling out the lyric sheet and reading the lyrics without listening to the music. And, you know, I don't take this the wrong way, but there are some pretty scary passages in there where I was reading stuff and I'm like, what in the hell is that? You know?
Yeah. Well, I like that thing of, you know, when you're a kid and there's something about your experience of life that's really unmediated. Like, you're not thinking things through in a very clear way, you're just sort of experiencing them very directly. And, you know, people have a sense. I always feel like I want to be, you know, reborn with every record. I always want to feel like I'm experiencing life in a kind of a raw way or something like that. And I always remember my first experiences as a kid realizing the world was scary and dangerous.
Sure.
And that sort of scary and dangerousness and a sort of a lack of protection and a lack of insulation from that was something that I kind of wanted to come through. And when I was making a record like Black Sheep Boy, it's a similar thing. It's like pushing your mind into a place that's scary for you, where you're you know, I think if I'm uncomfortable with the lyrics, then I know that other people are. And that's sort of something that I like. I mean, I like something that touches a raw nerve and that you run away from, and then you kind of like sort of gingerly reapproach. You know, I remember being a kid and watching Watership Down and being like completely scared, like, and horrified and disgusted and angry. And then I would kind of revisit it in my mind and think, oh yeah, yeah. And so it's like really, that's what it's really like being a rabbit. You know, you get run over by a car, eaten by a dog. It's not like Bugs Bunny. You know, you're not like able to miraculously run across a canyon or something like that. But you know, that whole thing of like it scares you and then you come back to it is sort of something that I really like in artwork.
How much nonfiction is in what you write in your songs?
Well, it's a mix, you know. Like sometimes the songs you might think they're the most autobiographical might have nothing to do with me, and sometimes the songs you think are the most fictional might be really true. It's just that some sort of significant words were changed, even. I don't think it's really fully possible to write from any perspective other than your own, because, you know, I could be completely deluded. I mean, I could be seeing a blue carpet and you guys, you know, I mean, like the word could mean something totally different to me. You never know, you're trapped inside your head. But on the other hand, I don't believe that, you know, burying yourself in your own feelings and kind of like solipsistically trying to you know, show off your kind of inner pain to the world I just feel like that a lot of the time that's boring. So I never really pursued that. I never really was one of these people who wanted it to sound like a diary entry or something like that.
Well, you succeeded. I'll say that. Reading over the lyrics, it's its own thing. Artwork looks great too, and this is all your stuff too, right?
No, that's a commonly made mistake. That art is by a guy who has a very similar name to me. It sounds unbelievable. His name is Will Schaff. And people make that mistake a lot, and sometimes I don't want to correct them because I want to take credit for his work. Yeah, but no, he is a guy who does not look like me, talk like me, you know, anything other than that we have real similar names and we're real good friends. But we worked together on all the records, actually, going back to our very first one. And what I usually do is I go visit him and I play him the songs and we talk about the record, and he sort of says, "Oh, you think that's what that song's about? I'll tell you what that song's about."
Well, that's great. Pretty trusting of you. Okkervil River is here on 88.9 Radio.